Everybody, and welcome back to our afternoon session for those of us who are in New York. Very happy to be continuing our theme of the Renaissance. Angela Voss certainly got us off to a beautiful start this morning as we make this shift from the mysteries of the North to the Elizabethan mysteries and Neoplatonism. So I'm very happy that Paul Bembridge is going to be able to carry on from some of the material that Angela Voss introduced us to us. First thing is speaking about Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, etc. So Paul is going to speak to us about how all of that made its way into Elizabethan England and especially into its poetry. Paul has taught English literature for many, many years at a university in the north of England, where he really specialized in Elizabethan and Jacobean poetry. So he's a great person for us to speak to. He actually lives in York. He's coming to us today from York in the north of England. I'm talking from New York and he's talking from Old York, the original. So the York come together here via the internet. Paul also taught at the Center for the Study of Esotericism at the University of Exeter, where he worked alongside Nicholas Goodrick Clark, who you may remember, those of you who were with us at the beginning, when Scott Olson did that delightful retrospective on all the quests over the last 25 years. The video there at the end was mostly of Nicholas Goodrick Clark, who founded that center. So Paul and Nicholas and Christopher McIntosh worked together along with others on that program, that master's and PhD program at the University of Exeter. I should also say that, that Paul is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and he's had a lifelong interest in the esoteric traditions of the West, particularly as they pertain to poetry. He's also one of my oldest friends. Whenever I go to Yorkshire, I always see Paul, and I look forward to doing that the next time the virus makes that possible. But meantime, Paul, it's just great to see you via the internet. So welcome, and over you to take it away.
Okay, I'm seeing myself on the screen now. Well, I'm seeing Ralph. Hi, thanks, Ralph, for that introduction. And it was very nice to hear Angela again this afternoon, because we used to teach together at Exeter, and we would sit in on each other's lectures. So that was good that happened again, as it were. And I think also she set the scene for my talk very well by emphasizing the importance of astrology to the Renaissance mind. So I'm very glad that Ficino tugged at her elbow on that occasion and said, hey, what about the astrology? Because it was just so important. It had grown really to become a major part of the intellectual culture of the Renaissance. And quite understandably so, because everyone believed that they lived at the center of the cosmos, with the Earth at the center. So when they looked out up at the sky, they thought they saw a belt of planets and stars moving around the Earth, and beyond that belt, they were persuaded was the realm of God and the angels. So it was perfectly natural for them to think of this central zone as a kind of intermediary zone through which God spoke to man on Earth, and also to the whole of nature. So that was an important part of their intellectual makeup. And of course, astrology had been around for a very, very long time, but it gained a new importance with the discovery of the Platonic text, the text of Iamblichus and Plotinus and Plato, through Ficino. And really, this brought people up in their traces, because they could now learn that they were dealing with the gods, as it were. Astrology was no longer a particularly scientific way of looking at the world. It was that, but for many people, it was also this spiritual way of looking at the world and the place of the gods in our world. And so pretty much every planet received an upgrade. You heard Angela say that Saturn, which used to be thought of as the planet of ill will and hard luck, was really upgraded into the planet of melancholic inspiration. So, and that was really true of most of the other planets too, that they all received a new kind of respect. And I'm hoping this afternoon to show you how the planet Venus was also upgraded and became central to the Platonic worldview. She was no longer the medieval strumpet. She became pretty much the maker of the cosmos, as you will hear. The other thing you'll hear is Ficino and co looking back to the ancient world, because it was always believed that that was the kind of golden age, and that if only they could get back to the original roots of things, the Prisca Theologia, as it was called, the original theology, then they would get nearer a better understanding of the world. So you'll see them looking back and combing through ancient texts for an understanding of what Venus really meant. So that's pretty much set the scene for my talk. So many thanks for that, Angela. Lovely to hear you again and to see you. So without further ado, I'll bring up my PowerPoint and begin this talk, which I found very interesting to research and write. I hope you'll enjoy the story, as it were. Here we go. So, Neoplatonism. Can you hear me okay, Carrie?
Yes, you sound great, Paul.
That's good. So there we are, that's the title. And here's the blurb. In the heat of the summer of 1468,
I'm sorry, Paul.
Yes,
sorry,
can
Paul.
you hear me?
Do you want to share your screen and so we can see your PowerPoint?
Oh, share screen. Okay, share screen. Let's go back to. Yeah, I need to share screen. I might have to come out of that. Let's have a look. Oh, yes. So
on the bottom, the green box.
Share screen, and then I click on my PowerPoint. Are you seeing this slide now?
I don't have it yet.
Oh, okay. I'll go a different route and share. Is that okay?
Yes, we have it now. Thank you so much.
You've got it, yeah?
Yes, we do.
And you can see that change of slide, yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, I'll carry on then, and you just pop in if things are going horribly wrong. So, in the heat of the summer of 1468, Cristoforo Landino, professor of rhetoric at the studio in Florence, left the city for the cooler airs of the surrounding hills, taking residence in the forest near the monastery of the Camaldoli. It was not long before his friends from the Platonic Academy joined him for visits, and soon the plan was formed to continue their usual Platonic discourse over a 4-day period by a fountain in a pine grove. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? Lovely. Among the friends who gathered there were Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici, Marsilio Ficino, Alamanno Rinuccini, Parenti Canisiani, Arduini, and Alberti. The record of their discussions, the Disputationes Camaldulenses, was written up by Landino in 1472, 4 years later, and the ideas preserved there would shape European religious philosophy for the next 2 centuries. Landino's work describes the curious application of an interpretative method frequently used in the Platonic Academy. It was founded on the idea that much of the poetry and religious philosophy of the ancient world was based on one underlying truth known to Platonists and differing only in the details of the allegories and symbols presented. Accordingly, the last 2 days of the Camaldulensian conference were devoted to the interpretation of Virgil's Aeneid along Platonist lines. The 19-year-old Lorenzo de' Medici had asked for someone to reveal the deeper meaning of this much revered poem, and the one who rose to the task was Alberti, the archetypal Renaissance man, now in his 64th year. Alberti said that the poem was about man's striving towards the ideal of philosophic life, that such a life was a search for truth, and that the end of such a search was the discovery of God. Thus, the long and arduous voyages of Aeneas represented the gradual and difficult ascent of the human soul towards the divine. But God does not reveal himself to those who wish to know him unless they manage to rise in life to a certain level and then remain there in constancy. Virgil's symbol for such a state of wisdom was Italy, the destination of Aeneas and the land where he settled for the rest of his earthly life. Troy, which he had left behind, represented the sensual life of ignorant youth, which did not yet consider the supreme aim of human life. Paris, who had remained within the walls of Troy, was the embodiment of this inferior life, dominated by the earthly Venus, that is, by the passion for the material satisfactions of the body. Paris died in the city he could not leave, without having made any lasting achievement. Here was Virgil's symbol for the error of a man who could not prove himself worthy of immortality. By contrast, Aeneas, guided by the celestial Venus, that is, by the love of the superior beauty of divinity, went in search of a land more congenial to its cultivation. And he found this in Italy, a token that this great and powerful nation was destined for lofty things, not least of which was Virgil himself, the poet of genius, who told of its founding. Alberti's reading of Virgil had some notable Italian precedents. Dante's portrayal of his love for Beatrice and Petrarch's account of his love for Laura were already being widely read as descriptions of ascent from earthly love to divine love. But what was new in Alberti's reading was the focus upon the unusual concept of the two Venuses. Paris followed the earthly Venus, where Aeneas followed the heavenly Venus. Here was a concept which Landino and his friends were coming to see as a major key to the religious mysteries of the ancient world. For in 1468, the same year in which the Camaldoli Conference took place, Marsilio Ficino began writing the De Amore, a treatise on love which took as its starting point Plato's Symposium, and went on to make this same distinction between the two Venuses. The work was destined to become, over the next 200 years, the great central textbook of Renaissance Neoplatonism, and the chief means by which Neoplatonism took hold as a philosophy of love. The Florentine scholars had found in Plato a distinction to be drawn between Aphrodite Pandemos, earthly Venus, and Aphrodite Urania, heavenly Venus. Commenting on the epithets Urania and Pandemos, which were anciently attached to Aphrodite, Plato said in the Symposium that they implied respectively exalted and common love. Building on this distinction, the leading Neoplatonist, Plotinus, 3rd century AD, had written of two Venuses born of different parents. The earthly Venus, daughter of Zeus and Dione, according to Homer, stimulating earthly love and procreation, and the heavenly Venus, daughter of Uranus, according to Hesiod, representing the soul at its divinest, even the world soul. That's Plotinus. Building on Plato and Plotinus, Ficino and his friends made these distinctions central to Renaissance Neoplatonism, pointing to the cosmos itself as embodying these two great principles, constituting a descending arc into materiality and a returning arc into divinity, led respectively by Venus in her earthly and heavenly aspects. These propositions I'm just looking for my script here. I'll have to go back. Okay. These propositions formed the heart of Ficino's argument in the De Amore, which in the words of its translator, Sears Jane, may be summarized as follows. So this is Jane's summary of the De Amore. The main thought. The cosmos consists of a hierarchy of being extending from God, unity, to the physical world, multiplicity. In this hierarchy, every level evolves from the level above it in a descending emanation from God and desires to rise to the level above it in an ascending return to God. The desire to return to one's source is called love, and the quality in the source which attracts this desire is called beauty. The human soul, as a part of the hierarchy of being, is involved in this same process of descent from God and return to God. In human beings, the desire to procreate inferior beings is called earthly love, and the desire to rise to higher levels of being is called heavenly love. Human love is therefore a good thing, because in both of its phases, descending and ascending, it's part of a natural cosmic process in which all creatures share. Ficino is, yes, he's in chapter 7 of the De Amore. Ficino linked these two directions of love, downward and upward, with the two Venuses, earthly and heavenly, upon the authority of ancient sources. There he is, Ficino. Next, the two kinds of love should be discussed briefly. He, Pausanias, mentions two Venuses. One Venus he certainly calls heavenly, but the other vulgar. That heavenly Venus was born of Uranus without any mother. The vulgar Venus was born of Jupiter and Dione. The former Venus first embraces the splendor of divinity in herself. Then she transfers it to the second Venus. The latter Venus transfers sparks of that splendor into the matter of the world. When the beauty of a human body first meets our eyes, our intellect, which is the first Venus in us, worships and esteems it as an image of the divine beauty, and through this is often aroused to that. But the power of procreation, the second Venus, desires to procreate a form like this. On both sides, therefore, there is a love. There, a desire to contemplate beauty. Here, a desire to propagate it. Is virtuous and praiseworthy, for each follows a divine image. Ficino is at pains to emphasize that the pursuit of earthly love and heavenly love are not in opposition, but both part of the divine plan at different stages. Thus, the contrast between Paris and Aeneas, as Alberti explained it, similarly, was not one in which Aeneas was good and Paris evil, but one in which Paris did not go beyond the pursuit of earthly love as he might have done, did not see the inherent call of the divine within the world of material beauty, and therefore remained in Troy, unresponsive to the promptings of the heavenly Venus, which, by contrast, took Aeneas far upon his spiritual journey. The philosophy of the two Venuses became widely disseminated throughout Europe in numerous secondary works, the most famous of which are these iconic Renaissance paintings, Botticelli's Birth of Venus and his Primavera. Both of these paintings were made for Lorenzo, son of Pier Francesco Medici, a pupil of Marsilio Ficino, and were probably commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who was close to both Ficino and Botticelli. They were painted around 1484, so the same year in which Ficino's De Amore was published, in which the philosophy of the two Venuses was prominently discussed. It's a testament to the centrality of that philosophy within the Ficino Medici circle that both paintings take this philosophy as their theme. The Birth of Venus shows the birth of the heavenly Venus from the foaming waves, and her arrival upon the shores of Cythera as the earthly Venus, represented by the maid on the right. She is the lower goddess who stands waiting to cover the higher goddess with the cloak of nature, which is the earthly dress of Venus. As such, the painting follows the cosmological process described above by Ficino. The form of Venus first embraces the splendor of divinity in herself. Then she transfers it to the second Venus. The latter Venus transfers sparks of that splendor into the matter of the world. We know that the central figure floating on a seashell is Venus Urania, i.e. daughter of Uranus, because her depiction here follows the well-known account given in Hesiod's Theogony, in which Aphrodite, i.e. Roman Venus, was said to have been born from the severed genitals of Uranus thrown into the stormy sea. Hesiod tells us what Botticelli shows, that Venus was born from the foamy sea before stepping forth onto the shore, a revered and lovely figure, the grass springing up beneath her delicate feet. That's what Hesiod says. From Hesiod, then, we can be sure that the maid on the right is Venus in her earthly aspect, Venus stepped ashore. And accordingly, she is shown wearing at her chest a garland of roses, sacred to Venus. The same flowers which are shown dropping from the sky in the center of the picture around the heavenly Venus. In the Primavera, similarly, Venus is centrally placed as Venus Urania, a spiritualized figure giving the sign of blessing to the scene, which includes her earthly counterpart, the floral figure on the right, who again dresses in the garment of nature. We know that the central figure is Venus because her son Cupid floats above her, and she has a rose at her chest. And we know that the floral figure, sometimes misidentified as Flora, spring, or nature, is the second Venus because she is shown strewing roses, the symbol of Venus, from her dress. On the extreme right, the lustful Zephyrus, god of winds, is shown seizing a maiden, and this same figure also appears in the Birth of Venus. In both cases, we may assume the figure is there to act as a warning against the perils of the downward arc into the material world, driven by Venus at her most lustful. And indeed, this Neoplatonist idea of the downward arc into the material world and the upward arc of return into the spiritual world is something which Botticelli builds into the Primavera painting, where the downward moving figure to the right is counterbalanced by the upward pointing figure to the left, who is Hermes or Mercury. The dancing figures are the three Graces, companions of Venus. Taken together then, both paintings demonstrate the importance of Venus within the Ficino Medici circle as a key figure in their religious and moral philosophy, and important. Lorenzo himself makes this clear in a poem he wrote called The Song of the Seven Planets, dated 1490, 2 years before his death. It's a short poem of 34 lines, which acknowledges the astrological powers of the planets in general, but names only one of them, Venus, who receives 2 stanzas of praise. She is the means by which our mortal world survives, he writes. So come, let's follow this propitious star, O lovely maids, O lads of goodly measure. The Venus philosophy next received major treatment in Francesco Colonna's Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, Venice, 1499, which translates as Polyphilus, his strife of love in a dream. And there you can see the translation by our own Jocelyn Godwin, who has joined us on so many of these quests, a towering figure. Polyphilus, this was a huge and richly illustrated romance which describes the journey of Polyphilus through fantastic symbolic landscapes in search of Polia. Once united, they become lovers and travel onwards to the temple of Venus Physizoia, the Venus of living nature, who represents the earthly Venus. And from there, they progress to the temple of Venus on the holy island of Cythera, the temple of the higher Venus, where the culminating events of the story take place. Here, the high priestess prepares the altar by strewing roses and seashells upon it, in line with the Venus symbolism of Botticelli. And after a sacrifice of doves and swans, birds sacred to Venus, a mystical rose bush grows from the altar, from which Polyphilus and Polia receive communion in the form of round, rosy fruits which grow upon it. Polyphilus feels strangely refreshed after eating from the rose bush, and his love is inspired with new life and strength. At the same time, the couple receive purification and blessing from the high priestess and are asked to follow the commandments and teachings of Venus ever after. Ostensibly a romance, the work drew attention to its status as a guide to the mysteries by providing a scattering of Latin and Greek inscriptions, a smattering of Hebrew and Arabic, together with many hieroglyphics. A widely disseminated work, it became a major text of the French Renaissance. It was translated and published in Paris in 1546 as Le Songe de Polyphile, and twice reprinted in 1554 and 1561. In England, a shortened translation was published in 1592 under the title The Strife of Love in a Dream, translated by the unnamed R.D. and dedicated to the memory of Sir Philip Sidney. Which brings us to the Elizabethans. Platonism and Italian Neoplatonism reached the English court by numerous routes, not least of which was John Dee, Elizabeth's favourite philosopher, who began his mathematical preface to Euclid 1570 with the words, "Divine Plato, the great master of many worthy philosophers." But more particularly, the Italian doctrine of the two Venuses was brought directly from Italy by the Italian Renaissance philosopher Giordano Bruno, who was in England between 1583 and 85, where he was welcomed by members of the Sydney Circle who shared his Neoplatonist outlook, including Fulk Greville, John Florio, Matthew Gwynne, and Sir Philip Sidney himself. A follower of Ficino and the mysteries of Venus, Bruno taught that love's divine power shone through the astrological cosmos, shaping the natural world and the soul of man, who, by an effort of mind, could discover this fabulous divine power within himself. Accordingly, he wrote a collection of love poetry exploring the mysteries of Venus, the Dei Heroici Furori, the Heroic Furies, which he published in London in 1585, the title page bearing a dedication to that most illustrious and excellent knight, Sir Philip Sidney. In the address to Sidney which followed, he wrote that there was as little chance of finding in his poems an account of vulgar and physical loves as there was of finding dolphins in treetops or bears under the sea. Rather, as Francis Yates summarized it, in the dedication to Sidney, Bruno explains that his Petrarchism is not of the ordinary kind, directed towards the love of a woman, but of a higher kind, belonging to the intellectual part of the soul. He's not against the vulgar loves, and indeed recommends them in their proper place, but it is towards the higher Cupid that his loves are addressed. It is clear that he is referring to Ficino's commentary on Plato's Symposium, with its theory of the two Venuses, or the two Cupids, one higher and one lower. But Bruno was not the first to bring the Florentine mysteries of Venus to Elizabethan England. In 1561, this is 20 years before Bruno's arrival in London, in 1561, just 3 years into the reign of Elizabeth, Sir Thomas Hoby published his groundbreaking translation of Castiglione's Courtier, originally published in 1528 and widely translated throughout Europe. The work described a fictional debate amongst the courtiers of the Duke of Urbino over several days in 1507. The aim of the debate was to weigh the qualities that make the perfect courtier: his bearing and eloquence, his bravery and learning, his treatment of ladies, and so forth. On the final day, the debate runs on into the night, ending with the great impassioned speech of Peter Bembo. He begins by distinguishing between the lover whose love is solely for the bodily beauty of his lady, and the lover who, quote, knoweth that beauty not to spring of the body, but from a higher source, a higher source which awakens the soul from its sleep and kindles within it, quote, the most holy fire of true heavenly love. This kindling, of course, was done by music as well, as Angela has just explained to us. Thus illumined, the enlightened courtier reaches an understanding of all things and achieves true happiness. Bembo therefore urges the courtiers to tread the path of ascent from earthly love to heavenly love, saying, let us climb up the stairs which at the lowermost step have the shadow of sensual beauty to the higher mansion place, where the heavenly, amiable, and right beauty dwells, which lies hidden in the innermost secrets of God. lest unhallowed eyes should come to the sight of it. His mind transported by his own speech, Bembo ends in prayer of such vehemence that a man would have thought him, as it were, ravished. He stands motionless, his eyes towards heaven, until Lady Emilia gently brings him back. My lords, he says, I have spoken what the holy fury of thoughtful indicted to me, that is, dictated to me. Now that it seemeth he inspireth me no more, I wot not what to say. And I think verily that love will not have his secrets discovered any further, nor that the courtier should pass the decree that his pleasure is I should show him. And therefore it is not perhaps lawful to speak any more of this matter. There are those such as, he goes on, there are those such as Plato, Socrates, Plotinus, and many others, he says, who have ascended to the heavenly level. But Castiglione takes the reader where Bembo will not, revealing the name of the goddess of these sacred mysteries in the final paragraph of the work. As the courtiers throw open the windows to the dawn, they saw already in the east a fair morning like unto the colour of roses, and all stars voided, saving only the sweet governess of heaven, Venus, the morning star. The star with which Castiglione ended his book was the star with which Sir Philip Sidney began when he came to write Astrophil and Stella, the most famous sonnet sequence in Elizabethan England, whose title translates The Star Lover and Star. The star lover is Sidney himself, and the star here is Venus in her earthly embodiment, the courtly Lady Penelope Devereux. The dying wish of Penelope's father had been that she and Sidney might marry, but in the event she was pressed into a marriage against her will to Robert Lord Rich in November 1581. The sonnets are therefore necessarily Petrarchan in the sense that they are addressed to an unattained. To return to our theme, she is not only a beautiful lady, but also the morning star, Venus. This dual identification is made in Sonnet 37, where Sidney proposes a riddle. How is it that Venus, the fortunate goddess of the dawn, should have had the absolute misfortune to have become Lady Rich? Listen then, lordings, with good ear to me, for of my life I must a riddle tell. Towards Aurora's court a nymph doth dwell, rich in all beauties which man's eye can see, who, though most rich in these and every part which makes the patents of true worldly bliss, hath no misfortune, but that rich she is. Aurora is the goddess of the dawn. Her court is the dwelling place of the nymph Venus, the morning star. She whom Castiglione's courtiers saw when they threw open the windows to the dawn, and saw already in the east a fair morning like unto the colour of roses, and all the stars voided, saving only the sweet governess of heaven, Venus. But there are two Venuses in Sidney's sonnet. The first is Stella, the morning star, rich in all beauties which man's eye can see, and the second is Penelope Devereux, also rich in beauty, but sadly rich by name. Sidney's allegiance to the mysteries of Venus seemed to have begun when he visited Italy during his European travels between 1572 and 1575, the land of the Muses and the country of the heart for anyone inspired by Renaissance philosophy. For it was here in Italy that Sidney seems to have dedicated himself to becoming a poet of the sacred. His Anglo-Italian travelling companion, Ludovic Biscuit, wrote in his elegy for Sidney how he with him did scale the craggy rocks of the Alps and Apennines, still with the Muses sporting, while those beams of virtue kindled in his noble breast, which after did so gloriously shine forth. Here in Italy, Sidney would find the models for his sonnets, Petrarch, for his romance, Arcadia, Sanazzaro, and a source for his treatise on poetry, The Defence of Poesy, in whose last paragraph he asks us to listen to Cristoforo Landino, with whom we began, for his knowledge of the sacred mysteries. Struck by Italian Neoplatonism as a powerful motivation to love, it drove Sidney's plans upon his return, for it had surely been brought home to him through his travels in Europe that the conventional idea of Christian love had failed, and that this different understanding of love, this love according to Venus, might stand a better chance of succeeding. Europe was disintegrating in the wars of religion, as the Catholic armies of the Counter-Reformation sought to retake territories lost in the revolt of the Protestant North. Sidney himself had witnessed in 1572 the massacre of the Protestant Huguenots in Paris. He would die in those wars of religion in 1586. Christianity was tearing itself apart. In his earliest known poems, Two Songs for an Accession Day Tilt, written for the festivities of November the 17th, 1577, Sidney imagined a pastoral world in which he became Felicides, the shepherd good and true. Incidentally, I should just comment on that name, Felicides. You can see in it Phil Sid, i.e. Philip Sidney, but also the etymology of it is lover of the stars, Phil Cides. And of course, Astrophil is another way of saying that, which he does later. But in these, his earliest poems, he presents himself as Felicides, the shepherd good and true, who calls at the house of the ploughman Menalcas and asks him to leave off work upon this, the chief of Cupid's Sabbath days. This is the accession day of Elizabeth, the chief of Cupid's Sabbath days, lest he defile this holy time. Menalcas obliges, happy to support the sacred cause. For other saints he knoweth not their days. In the second song, in similar vein, this Sabbath day is celebrated as the day on which she entered, the day whose royal saint, Elizabeth, brings love without constraint, all saints else confuted. Well, the suggestion that Elizabeth, who had a Christian country to run, might rebrand her accession day as a feast day of Cupid, son of Venus, all Christian saints confuted, was no doubt a playful one, but it made an honest Renaissance point. How better the country might become with Venus as its patron, goddess, than a country overseen by medieval Christian saints. Between 1582 and 1585, Sidney completed the love sonnets and drastically reorganized his pastoral romance, Arcadia, which he'd begun a few years earlier. One of the main aims of the new Arcadia, it seems, was to give it a structure which better embodied the philosophy of the two Venuses. It now began with the lament of the noble shepherds Strephon and Caius for the absent Urania, as they stood upon the sandy shore of Cythera and looked inward to the island itself. From this and many other clues, we may be sure that Urania here is Venus Urania. Sidney here following the story given in Hesiod's account, where the island of Cythera is named as the first point at which Venus steps ashore from the waves. In line with the Italian account of Venus Urania, shaper of the cosmos, Sidney links his Urania with starry knowledge. In the opening pages of the New Arcadia, Claius says, "Hath not the only love of her made us, being silly, ignorant shepherds, raise up our thoughts above the ordinary level of the world, so as great clerks do not disdain our conference? Hath not the desire to seem worthy in her eyes made us, when others were sleeping, to sit viewing the course of the heavens?" In a contrasting narrative which forms the main storyline, the two noblemen, Pyrocles and Musidorus, follow what appear to be the promptings of Venus' Pandemos, or earthly love. They fall passionately in love with two noble ladies and become increasingly entangled in complicated pursuits involving disguises and deceptions. No doubt Sidney wished to draw the salutary distinction between the two kinds of love he was writing about, to which Plato had anciently attached the epithets common and exalted, that of Pyrocles and Musidorus versus that of the noble shepherds. Edward Spencer. Sidney's main collaborator in his endeavours to plant the teachings of Venus-centred Neoplatonism in the minds of the English was Edmund Spencer, who published the Shepherd's Calendar in 1579. 12 pastoral eclogues, one for each month, about the lives and loves of idealised shepherds under the 12 signs of the zodiac, which usher in the eclogues each in turn. But in addition to the sense of cosmic order thus created, the province of the heavenly Venus in Italian Neoplatonism, we are introduced to a figure representing the earthly Venus. This is Rosalind, a country lass whom Colin Clout, Spencer's name for himself, tries to win. For the poem came with a commentary, and the commentary on Rosalind said that this was, quote, a feigned name, which, being well ordered, will bewray or show the very name of his love and mistress. Deliberately puzzling, the comment may be elucidated along the following lines. Rosalind was a name which Spencer appears to have introduced into the English language from the Spanish, meaning lovely rose. The rose was an emblem of Venus. Therefore, Colin's pursuit of his shepherdess may be said to represent the natural promptings of the earthly Venus experienced in youth. This conjecture is confirmed in Colin Clout's Come Home Again, the biographical pastoral poem Spencer wrote in 1591. For he now sees Rosalind as a more exalted figure linked with heavenly beauty. She is the beam of beauty sparkled from above, the flower of virtue and pure chastity, the blossom of sweet joy and perfect love. As the beam of beauty sparkled from above, Rosalind reflects the beauty of the earthly Venus, in line with Ficino's comments in the De Amore, where he says, the former Venus first embraces the splendour of divinity in herself, then she transfers it to the second Venus. The latter Venus transfers sparks of that splendour into the matter of the world. Ficino's sparks of splendour, we may say, are Spencer's beams of beauty sparkled from above. But it's not only Rosalind who receives an upgrade in Colin Clout's Come Home Again. Colin too now realises that, quote, love's perfection passeth reason's reach, and needs his priest to express his power divine. And a shepherdess, Melissa, comments, Colin, thou now fully deeply hast divined of love and beauty. He's growing, she's growing. They're ascending the ladder of love. The story of Colin's ascent is completed in Book 6 of The Fairy Queen, 1596, which narrates the quest of Sir Calidore. Approaching Mount Acidali, the Mount of Venus, Calidore sees maidens dancing on its summit, and drawing near, sees Colin piping to his lass, she to whom that shepherd piped alone, that made him pipe so merrily. Placed in the centre of 3 other ladies who are in turn encircled by others, she leads the dance. As the astonished Calidore draws nearer still, the vision fades, leaving him to interrogate Colin, who explains that all the dancing ladies were Venus damsels, and that the 3 central ladies were her especial attendants, the 3 Graces, and that the central lass, crowned with a rosy garland, was his own country lass, but also divine resemblance, beauty sovereign rare. Colin has finally understood that love for Rosalind at its purest and most joyous is inseparable from a love of Venus Urania. Over several poems and many years then, Spenser had shown what it was to climb the ladder of love, from the simple and natural love of a shepherd for his country lass to love service of the most exalted kind. But time was now pressing. 3 years before his death, and with the enormous labour of the Fairy Queen only half completed, Spenser turned away from the project to write his last poems, which included 4 hymns, 1596. He died in 1599. It seems that he did so, that is, he turned away from that vast project to the 4 hymns. It seems that he did so in order to say quickly and directly through philosophic verse that which he had been saying more indirectly for years through romance and allegory. As he tells us in a prefatory statement, these last poems comprise, quote, 2 hymns of earthly or natural love and beauty, 2 others of heavenly and celestial. It's not difficult to see in this arrangement Spenser's final effort excuse me, to develop the philosophy of the 2 Venuses, which he'd found in Ficino's De Amore, and which had guided him since the days of his collaboration with his dearest friend, Sir Philip Sidney. Time does not permit discussion of the poets whom Spenser fostered, or the sonnet sequences which followed Sidney's, those such as Fulk Greville's Kylica, Samuel Daniels' Delia, or Michael Drayton's Idea. But suffice it to say that their main subject is usually a beautiful lady who reflects and gives access to the higher beauties of Venus, which shine through her. Rather, I want to conclude by discussing a text which has been of abiding interest to participants in the esoteric quest these past 25 years, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. There it is, translated by Jocelyn Godwin, with introduction and commentary by Adam MacLean, 2 of our fellow travellers, leaders of our travel, indeed. The Chemical Wedding, published in 1616, this is now, what, 20 years after Spenser? The Chemical Wedding, published in 1616, forms one of the 3 manifestos which launched the Rosicrucian movement in the early 17th century. It tells the story of how Christian Rosenkreutz, the founder of the movement, enters upon the path of initiation after receiving an invitation to a royal wedding. He sets off with roses in his cap to signify what kind of initiation he is attempting. Indeed, what kind of initiation Rosicrucianism itself was offering. Initiation into the mysteries of Venus. There we are, off to the royal wedding. There's the castle in the background, which you'll recognise as Český Krumlov. And here we are in the street. Full of excitement, Christian Rosenkreutz makes his way to the royal castle, where he sees many other candidates for admission to the mysteries. But there are tests to be passed in the coming days, candidates to be weighed in the balance. Many strange and fantastic events occur, and eventually the remaining candidates reach a great lake on the fifth day. They take their place in boats whose sails carry the symbols of the Platonic solids and the universal sphere, no doubt to remind us that the journey of initiation is a philosophic journey, which requires some understanding of these things. And at last they come to the sea, where they stop and listen to the sea nymphs who sing a song about exalted love, which begins, "On earth there's nothing better than fair and noble love, through which we are made godlike." The source for this part of the narrative is Colonna's Hypnerotomachia previously discussed, in which similarly the voyagers ship oars and listen to the nymphs sing of the mysteries of love. Clearly we are here in familiar philosophic territory at this point in the chemical wedding. Rosenkreutz listens intently to the sea nymph's song, which goes on for 7 verses, describing how love gives all our birth and continues to sustain our lives in grace and goodness. But far from feeling exalted by the call of the higher Venus, who is represented here, Christian is feeling guilty and anxious. Now I'm moving into familiar philosophic territory. The problem is this. In the morning of the same day, he'd come across the lower Venus, and sadly this was not the one who shone through some fair lady and led his thoughts upward, but that lower version of Venus still descending, inflaming sensual appetites. He'd come across a door in the castle, upon which was written, "Here lies buried Venus, the fair woman, who has undone many a great man." Nevertheless, he enters with the help of a page, and he descends in darkness, was it just me, to a room where he had seen Lady Venus quite naked in bed, the page having obligingly lifted the covers. Guiltily returning, he'd met Cupid on the stair, who'd given him a nasty scratch with his arrow tip for loitering suspiciously near his mother's bed. Now, as he listened to the song of exalted love, the arrow scratch was beginning to bother him, and he warns the reader, for the whole book is a warning tale, not to hang around the bed of Venus. On the 7th day, the last day, the Venus incident returns to haunt him further. He meets a porter at the gate who used to be a famous royal astrologer, but who has now fallen on evil times. His crime was offending Lady Venus by seeing her in bed, and as punishment, he was made to guard the first portal until someone should release him from it. Someone, that is, who had committed the same crime. And so it is that poor Rosenkreutz, who has passed so many earlier tests of admission, is finally faltered and ruefully prepares to sit by the gate for the rest of his miserable days, at which point the narrative ends, apparently unfinished. The Chemical Wedding is an amusing work, which may have more to say about spiritual alchemy than physical alchemy, for it is a work which is clearly set within the philosophic landscape of Venus-centered Neoplatonism. There is a downward arc into materiality and an upward arc into more spiritual realms, and both are driven by Venus, love in its differing directions. Like Paris, in Alberti's interpretation of Virgil's Aeneid, Rosenkreutz was finally held back by his earthly Venus. True, he'd glimpsed the promise of the heavenly Venus, but like T.S. Eliot's Prufrock, was forced to admit, I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. Alberti had said that God does not reveal himself to those who wish to know him unless they manage to rise in life to a certain level and then remain there in constancy. A constancy which, like many of us, poor Rosenkreutz was not able to maintain. So Alberti had added that Virgil's symbol for such a state of constancy was Italy. And it is to Italy that we have mainly travelled today to learn of these things. But looking at the wider picture, what can we finally learn from assembling the pieces and realising that what we're seeing here is an abiding feature of the cultural map of Europe between about 1500 and 1600 or more? So the question I leave you with is this. What was so useful about the two Venus theory that it commanded so wide an allegiance? Thanks for your attention. I'm being told that my internet connection is unstable, so I'm not sure how the Q&A is going to go, but we can try.
We can try that, Paul. Thank you so much. I just want to take a moment. Paul, if you want to get your headphones on, that may help. But I'd like to take a moment and introduce Catherine Davis, who is part of the Open Center team. And she is joining us, and she's going to be here to help moderate the question and answer part of this talk.
And thank you for inviting me to join you. Let's have any questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you have a question you want to bring in to ask face to face.
Paul, can you please stop sharing your screen? Up on the top, you'll see it says stop share on that red button. Oh, we just lost Paul.
While we're waiting for Paul to return, we might want to look into the chat, where there is a thought here from Angela. Can we see that? That there's Paul is back, looking very curious and intently at the screen. So we have, so Paul, are you getting your headphones?
Okay, I'll do that, Ralph, yes. No problems for that.
And
hang on.
So Paul.
Okay, headphoned up.
Okay, Kathy, over to you.
Hi. Have I got a question to answer? Or?
Yeah, well, there's a comment in the screen, in the chat box there from Angela about.
Oh, hi, Angela. I don't see it. Let's have a look.
Yeah, let me read it for you if I can. It says, Tom Bree has suggested that the earthly and heavenly Venus are seen in the sky as Venus, as the morning and the evening star, that this may be the cosmological origin of the idea of the two Venuses. And that was a comment from Angela. And,
yes, absolutely, Angela. What a lovely suggestion. Yeah, because of course the evening star is going into the dark part of the day, the material descent, and there's Venus, the morning star, coming into the light. Yeah, what a lovely suggestion. I haven't seen that comment in the original Renaissance material, but I can well understand that it would be there.
Excellent. And also you have from Scarlett, perhaps the concept of two Venuses could remind man of his dual nature, with a question mark.
Yes, I think you're right. The body and soul, basically, isn't it? That we are brought into earthly incarnation and yearn for the return, I guess. It seems to be something very deep within us. But I think, I was asking myself this question at the end. Why did it become so popular only now in the Renaissance period? I think I partly answered that at the beginning. I think this was part of the new Renaissance spirit, which differed from the medieval spirit in some ways. I remember when I was first doing my postgraduate work. Someone is speaking. Do I hear?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. I think we just had a little bit of background noise on one of our moderators.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was saying that when I first did my postgraduate research on medieval art and literature, my topic was concepts of landscape in medieval art and literature. And it was driven in some ways by a remark I'd seen in Kenneth Clark's book, was it Landscape into Art? Yep. Where he talks about and we all know this distinction between the medieval artists and the Renaissance artists. Suddenly they got very, very good at rendering beautiful landscapes and people. They got very good at representing the world as it looks to us through perspective and all the rest of it. Whereas the medieval artists seemed not at all concerned with that. Is that because they were bad painters? No, I don't think so. I think it's probably more to do with the fact that their view of the world was that it was a bunch of symbols and one should not really give too much attention to it as a thing in itself. So what this Venus business is doing, I think, is giving permission for us to look at the world as a beautiful thing in its own right and still have that lead us to God, the divine realm, if you like, without having to see bits of nature as merely symbolic. So that's to answer my own question.
And we have one of our listeners, guest, Halvard, who has put up his hand, and he has a question for you. So could you please unmute Halvard from the bottom left corner of your screen?
Yes. Let me see. Can you all see me and hear me now? Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Halvard.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there seems to be a certain delay in the transmission, so I hope it will be okay. I had to pick this book down from my shelf. The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. You showed that book in your presentation. And at the end of the book, as you told us, Christian Rosenkreuz, he was sure he had somehow failed in his quest because the shameful event when he had seen the Venus unveiled. Actually, as you also said, there is a part missing, but in this and other edition, there is a couple of lines with text in brackets saying in the translation, about 2 pages in quarto are missing here, in which the author, thinking that he must be a gatekeeper in the morning, returns home. What is the meaning of that? I have understood that he actually did not fail that feeling, that humble experience when he was so close to the goal, and imagined these things that he had failed. It was kind of a final test, something. He might actually have succeeded. Any thoughts about that?
Thanks, Hal, but I hope other people got more of what you said than I did, but I understand that you're addressing the question of whether Christian Rosenkreutz truly fails or not, and well, in the story he does, for the reasons that I gave, but also I had said that there were many tests which he did pass, and to look at those we would need to really look at the symbolism throughout the book. It's very dense in its landscape of symbols, and you know, it really does need us to look at it carefully, page by page, symbol by symbol, to get what he didn't fail at as well. There's a lot in there that we can pin our own star to, as it were. Yeah, thanks, Alvard. Lovely to see you. Something from Scarlett there. Do you believe the Renaissance was familiar and inspired by the philosophy of courtly love? Absolutely, Scarlett, very much so. This was their recent literature, courtly love. Then, you know, Dante and Beatrice, Petrarch and Laura, these were giants of literature for the Renaissance mind. Chaucer, of course, writes about courtly love, and he was hugely popular in the 16th century. So yeah, courtly love was, and all the romances suddenly got reprinted. In fact, the Renaissance probably knew more about courtly love than the medieval writers did who produced it, because of course you'd got printing, which suddenly appears, and was so hungry for text that it reprinted all of those fabulous medieval courtly romances. And a lot of courtly rituals were going on at the court of Elizabeth in imitation of those. Thanks for that question, but yes, the answer in a nutshell is very much so.
There was an earlier question here from Leonard, and he says, many thanks, Paul. The two Venuses doctrines seems to be similar to that of the Occitan troubadours, who praised court ladies as earthly reflections of the Madonna. I wonder if the troubadours also discovered the two Venuses in different guises.
Well, as far as I know, this is new to Alberti. And who got it first, Alberti or Ficino? Difficult to say. They're in the same gang. But Alberti was talking about this even before the Camaldoli conference. Yes, the basic idea that one's love for a beautiful woman, one's love for a woman, can lead one towards love of the divine, was central to troubadour poetry, central to Dante and to Petrarch. But I don't think they made that connection to the idea of two Venuses.
And we have Gregory, who has raised his hand and wants to ask you a question.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, Paul. Great to see
Greg.
you again.
Yeah, so good to see you.
Thank you, and great to hear you talk. I derived so much from it as a former student of English literature and as a participant in the quests. I have a comment.
Yes.
I want to follow up on your question, your very last question at the end of your talk. What is it about the two Venuses that has such resonance for us? And just amusing about that, I think that as one of the sources you quoted says, it's very important not to apply our either or thinking to the issue of the two Venuses, because I think our modern challenge is to accept and respect both Venuses,
Yes.
because we are here struggling with materialism and attempting to help our society, our global society, to emphasize more and demonstrate more of the spiritual values here in the world. For example, eliminating hunger. Hunger is a physical reality. It has to do with the earthly Venus, but our goal is a spiritual one, to eliminate world hunger. So I see these two forces at play in many different arenas of our world, not to mention the upcoming election. I wanted to just comment on that. There are many levels at which we are struggling with these two Venuses, and not to reject the earthly Venus, but to bring down the spiritual Venus into our affairs here in this world. So that's basically
Absolutely.
my commentary, and it's a wonderful
Yes.
talk.
Well said, Greg, and very much in the spirit of Ficino's commentary. It's not a question of good and evil here. It's a question of seeing, of taking that love of beauty that we all have, just taking it a little bit further in the right direction. Thanks so much for your comments, and so good to see you both here.
Yeah. And the love of beauty, of course, was very present in Christianity. I have several books that I've read about the importance of beauty in Christianity. So beauty is in one way of worshiping Venus. Anyway, thank you again.
Yeah, love and beauty. Those are the key words for Venus, sure.
That's excellent. And we have a few more questions if we have any, if we have time. From Jonas, greatest congratulations, Paul, for a totally brilliant presentation. No questions at this time, but thankful for pointers back to Castigny, Spencer, Sir Philip Sidney, and descendants. And so it seems like you're getting a lot of accolades for this talk and gratitude for this presentation. So let's see if we have any questions we may have missed. So I think we have everything so far. If anyone else has a question, please put it into the chat.
There are some more questions there from Leonard George. You see Leonard's there?
Let's see.
Many thanks, Paul, the two Venus doctrine.
I must have missed him, so I don't see him right away.
That was already read, Ralph.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
There was.
And then let's see. Did we read from Jacob Fischel? Do you find resonance of the two Venuses in Shakespeare, Venus and Adonis, 1592, sonnet cycle or plays?
Oh, it looks like we lost Paul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, he was getting a message that his Wi-Fi was unstable. So let's give him a moment because he's been able to go off and come back on. But we can take this opportunity actually to let everyone know that Yuri's talk is now posted online on our conference website. You just need to look up where it says recordings and you'll see his talk there. So we have access to that now for you.
That's excellent. So here we are.
I still don't see Paul. We may have lost him.
I think he's coming
Oh,
back.
here he comes.
So Paul, if you could bring back your camera. There you
Hi, I'm back.
are.
Can you see me? Yes, and hear me?
Yes,
Okay, I'm back.
we
Yeah.
can see you.
Okay, well, the question there was about, do I see this philosophy in Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, in his sonnets, and generally in his plays? And the word is absolutely. Shakespeare was very much part of the Sydney school of poetry, and this was the kind of philosophy he was into. I have to say, I read Venus and Adonis quite recently, a few months ago, and it's quite a. This is very much Venus in her lower aspect. It's quite outrageous. So not much of the exalted Venus there, but in the sonnets, of course, these are divided into two parts. The first part to the fair youth, which is very much about the exalted Venus, and then the second part to his dark lady, which is far more of the earthly Venus. So yes, it is constructed on the same principle as are many of his plays. Very deep subject. I'd love to be with you in the flesh, as it were, and kick these things around further, because you do see these resonances all through Shakespeare.
And we have another question from one of our guests, Scarlett. Please unmute from the lower left corner, and if you can unmute your screen.
Oh, I totally forgot what my question was. I can't see it now. I just want, well, thank you so much. And it just popped into my head that perhaps the two Venuses have something to do with the old, I'm sorry to say, dichotomy with virgin whore. So perhaps they're all, both of them are necessary, but one is to be aspired to.
Yes. Both are necessary, and both have a place. They both play a part in the cosmic cycle. That was what was said, wasn't it, by several of the authorities I quoted, yeah.
Thank you.
But there's a danger too of forgetting, of going too deep into materiality, that we forget, we don't make the turn. It's like a swimmer, you know, going to the end of the bath, the swimming bath. He needs to make that turn, not plow through the brick wall, as it were, and get stuck.
Excellent. So thank you, Scarlett, for that question. And we're looking to see what we might have missed. You achieved alchemical transubstantiation here. So greatest congratulations. Has the quest for earthly Venus led to the oppression and objectification of women, leading finally to public awareness now in the Me Too movement, etc.? So this may be relevant today. This is coming to us from Andrea.
Thanks,
Something
Andrea.
to think about. And let's see. Okay, I don't see any questions coming through. So if anyone else has a question,
I think I've lost the link. This is Ralph here a few times, so you may have done it, but I see questions from Nanette. Have you already dealt with that, or from Steve Bass? Nanette Shaw.
Oh, I see Nanette's question. In the early portion of your presentation, it seems that there was continuity between earthly and divine heavenly Venus love. But in the chemical wedding, it seems a dichotomy surfaces. Does that reflect a change in view, or was the dichotomy always there?
I didn't get all of that, but from I think what you were saying was that the dichotomous nature is more stressed in the chemical wedding, and that is absolutely the case. Yes, maybe something has moved on in the culture. But yeah, we'd have to look at that more carefully. Yeah, thanks, Nanette. I'm sure you're right. If I've understood you correctly, my internet connection has gone crazy here.
Okay, let's see. So have you seen any that I might have missed?
Did you see Steve Bass, Catherine? I'm not sure if we did that already.
Oh, Steve Bass. Does the lecture of Diotima in the symposium suggest a method of returning to the higher Venus starting from the lower, thus uniting the two?
Yeah, I didn't get all of that, Steve, but I think you're talking about a character in the symposium, Diotima. I don't have that material sufficiently in mind to be able to comment sensibly about it. But thanks for raising the point.
Okay. Let's see if we can find another question here. Jonas Ruta, is there a connection in the Elizabethan period between the heavenly and earthly Venuses and the duality of Sophia of the Virgin and the Pistos Sophia of the Magdalene?
Hi, Jonas. Good to see you on here. Lovely to connect again. I don't think they knew about the Pistis Sophia. I don't think that was discovered until the 18th century, I seem to remember. How much they knew about Gnosticism, very difficult to say, but there were Gnostic texts or Gnostic philosophic values were coming down from various sources. Well, not least of which is the Hermetic Corpus, which has has those Gnostic values. So perhaps that's the place to look. Certainly, the Elizabethan writers knew this work. Henry Vaughan, look at Henry Vaughan. The World. That's more or less a paraphrase of the Asclepius. Good to see you, Jonas.
All right. Catherine, do you think that's the lot?
Yep, I think that we're ready to, Ralph,
Okay.
if you can
Sure.
wrap this up for us, make some announcements and.
Hey, Paul. Lovely.
Hi, Ralph.
There. You got lots of appreciation, quite rightly too. It was so nice to go from Ficino's Florence to Elizabethan England. I've never seen that done so lucidly before. So thank you so much. Great to
You're
have
welcome.
you there, and it's nice to have the old New York link happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me just reiterate what what Carrie said, that our talk there on Francis Yates and the Hermetic and Rosicrucian Renaissances by Yuri Stoyanov. As we know, he had an internet problem back on our second day on Saturday, but he has recorded it. And Paul referenced Francis Yates again, and so that's great. Of course, the very first conference back in '95 in Český Krumlov, which Paul was at, and he's been at so many over the years, was done in honor of Francis Yates. Anyway, we do now have an audio recording, as Carrie said. It's in the recording section on the homepage of the website. So please look at that. And yeah, if you've never heard Yuri speak, you should give yourself the pleasure of hearing him speak. He has a unique body of knowledge. Okay, well, let me just say a little bit more then about our upcoming panel. We have half an hour off now. And at 3 o'clock New York time, we will resume with a panel in honor of Keith Critchlow. And now Keith Critchlow, who just died earlier this year, wonderful man, professor of the Royal College of Art for years. But I remember him speaking at the Open Center in the 80s on the sacred architecture, not only of Chartres Cathedral in France, but of course, of the the Sufi mosques, the amazing Sufi mosques on the Silk Road in Samarkand and Bukhara, and how they too are filled with all kinds of Platonic, Pythagorean, symbolic and sacred number and measure and proportion. So we look forward to that. And that will be given, there'll be 3 panelists, as I mentioned earlier. There'll be one from New York, our own Steve Bass, who a practicing architect who just did a lovely book on beauty. And also Adam Williamson, who will be a newcomer to the quest, who worked very closely with Keith and I think is an expert on Islamic design and crafts and the use of sacred proportion in all of that. And Nick Cope, who is now the head of RILCO, R-I-L-K-O, the Research into Lost Knowledge organization that was begun way back, I believe, in the 70s by Keith Critchlow, by John Michel, who we saw in the video with Nicholas Goodrick Clark when Scott Olson gave us that retrospective. So it'll be 3 panelists then speaking really an appreciation of the life and work and contribution of the wonderful Keith Critchlow, a really remarkable man who gave so much while he was here. So I think that's it. I think that's all we need to say right now. So we'll sign off. Thanks again, Paul, for the lovely talk. And we'll see you in half an hour. Bye.